Good morning, colleagues. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll be starting in a few minutes, but before we start, it's very important that we respect some ground rules for this meeting. As we all know, we are currently in a very multilingual mix. We have colleagues from the Francophone side of West Africa, as well as colleagues from the Anglophone side of West Africa. So that we can have a very smooth and interesting discussion, kindly respect the following ground rules. It's very important that you keep your line muted, both microphone and video. In case you have any comments, please put them in the chat box. If you lose your internet connection, kindly reconnect using the meeting link we have emailed to you. And to choose your preferred language, kindly click on the interpretation icon on the bottom of your screen and select your language. We'll be having an interactive session and our panelists will be making contribution, and then we'll be having a group discussion. During the group discussion, please, if you are given the floor, kindly stick to the language which you will be speaking. If you are an Anglophone and you are coming to make a contribution in English, kindly be on the language English to avoid duplicate of voice in the background. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have all of you. And we will now leave the floor to my colleague, Omoloha Balogun, so that we can start this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shamraid, my able colleague. Good morning, colleagues in Ghana, across West Africa, across the continent, and across the world. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another webinar series under our COVID-19 series of webinars. My name is Omolara Balogun. I work with the West Africa Civil Society Institute as the heads of policy influencing and advocacy unit. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this interesting conversation today. Today we are looking at elections amidst COVID-19. We have themed this conversation, COVID-19 and elections, safeguarding citizens' mandate in West Africa. You will agree with me that COVID has happened, and as you can see across the globe, it's something that we may have to live with for quite some more months, if not years. Therefore, we need to move on with our lives, and that includes countries that have planned to hold elections this year have to continue, or otherwise, I mean, the conversation will tell us which way to go or what your views are. So without really taking much of your time, I would like to introduce a good friend of mine, a colleague of so many years, who will be co-moderating this section with me today. We have interesting panelists that we have carefully selected across the continent. Permits me to introduce Ibrahima Amadou Niang. Ibrahima is the current country officer for Open Society Initiative for West Africa in Guinea. Ibrahima holds a bachelor's in international relations and economics from the University of Reading, England, and a master's degree in international public law and international governance from Cheikh Anta Diop University in Senegal, where he also undertook his PhD. So Dr. Ibrahima. Ibrahima has been a resource in issues around democracy, governance, and elections. He's a bridged expert facilitator. If you're very familiar with the electoral arena, you know Bridge as one of those institutions that have spearheaded electoral management issues in West Africa, in Africa. Ibrahima has also provided diverse technical assistance to many elections management bodies across the region. Is a capacity builder and is pretty much interested in anything electoral processes, civil society, political parties, inter-party dialogue, and economics of development and advocacy. Ibrahima, I am so happy to have you co-moderate this section with me today. So I'm going to leave the floor for you to take on now as we kick in this conversation. Ibrahima, you have the floor now.
Thank you so much, Lara, really. And unfortunately, I cannot have my video on because of internet issues, obviously. But hello everyone, and really welcome to today's session. And thanks to WACS's team for organizing this important conversation and bringing together some of the finest electoral experts in the region. So it's really a pleasure to call more Balogun. So as we all know, some countries in this region are facing serious, inclusive, and peaceful during the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, countries like Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger have plans to hold elections this year. So all these countries will face several challenges. Challenges around participation, issues around closing civic space, issues around transparency of the process, quality of management of the electoral process, and also issues around the conduct of voter registration. The specific political situations in some of these countries could really exacerbate these challenges and jeopardize the democratic progress we've made in the region. And with the door wide open, for instance, for Guinea's President Alpha Condé to run for a third term, the risks of violent protests and pre-election and post-election crises are very high. In Cote d'Ivoire, the new uncertainties related to whether President Ouattara will or will not run for the elections, and disagreements around the composition of the Electoral Commission and the electoral list, among other factors, could lead to a crisis. So these are just two examples. And the reality is that even with this context, there is insistence to go ahead with the elections. So, as civil society actors, media representatives, ECOWAS, and development partners, we have a responsibility to ensure that citizens' mandate in West Africa is safeguarded. To provide us with some insight on today's discussion field, with whom both Omolara and myself have worked in some capacity. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to briefly introduce them in no particular order. Francis Gabriel Oke is head of the election division at the ECOWAS Commission, and through ECONEC, Francis offers elections assistance to ECOWAS member states through election monitoring, training of election experts, and management of pre-election and post-election evaluations. Wojo Fini Traore from Cote d'Ivoire is a human rights expert and the former vice president of the National Human Rights Commission of Cote d'Ivoire. He has observed many elections on the continent and advocates for the harmonization and implementation of international human rights instruments in national laws, as well as the popularization of a free, independent, and professional press. My good friend Olufunto Akindiro is Senior Program Officer at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International IDEA. She serves as the electoral processes lead expert for the Africa and West Africa region, responsible for providing thematic support to the regional and country offices, designing and managing election knowledge production. And it's her Franklin Cujo. Franklin is the founding president and chief executive officer of Imani Center for Policy and Education, a think tank of global repute dedicated to the promotion of the institutions of a free society across Africa. He has extensive experience advising governments and organizations on socio-economic development across Africa, as well as making regular commentaries and proffering recommendations on national policy issues. So Welcome again, and we're really glad to have you all with us today for this dialogue on COVID-19 and elections, safeguarding citizens' mandate in West Africa. We will take 2 presentations in the first part of this dialogue, and then open it up for comments, questions from the participants on the call. So please use the chat button, which is open, to ask your questions. One of our colleagues will take note of the questions, and then Omolara and myself will be able to direct them to the presenters. And I want to say this really, we would love to hear from you. Let Franklin Kujo to make his presentation on the Ghana country situation. And Franklin, whilst we trust your expertise in this,
yes,
you can address most of them, but I will remind you in case there are some that you haven't touched on. So without further ado, Franklin, you have the floor.
Well, good morning. Thanks very much, Ibrahima. Thank you, Omolara, and the WAXA team, and all our friends across the continent who are part of this august call, or webinar, I should say. We certainly are living in interesting times. As a think tank, we ordinarily were not going to immerse ourselves into the election processes per se, except of course to say that we were going to start asking politicians what their business plans really are, which is what we've been doing all this while. But we got interested in the electoral management process only because our electoral commission started off on a rather interesting note that they thought the biometric verification equipment or the biometric election equipment that were going to be used for this year's elections were all obsolete, and that it was going to cost us far less if we were to replace the existing systems. And because we are interested in value for money analysis, we got interested in the discussions and thought that, look, the claims the Electoral Commission was making was not founded. And we did that precisely because we also knew that after the elections, we have lives to lead. And where livelihoods matter, we need to be seen to be tightening our loins, tightening our budgets, and preventing waste. So we thought that spending almost $150 million on an electoral management process or electoral process, when we could have easily spent, let's say, $30 or $35 million, was not on. But anyway, all of that has translated. A lot of conversations happened. We took the matter all the way to traditional authorities, that matter. We did enormous activism. Sometimes it wasn't palatable activism because if you know Imani quite well, we can be quite, for lack of a better word, we can be quite stubborn. And we took it to, so we did civic activism, public engagement. We showed evidence that we think mattered. Diplomatic missions, about 15 of them invited us to make the presentations. They were all convinced that indeed we did not need a new system. It was only the Electoral Commission that failed to respond to any of our financial claims, and indeed any of our claims that still went ahead. We thought we could find solace in the courts. Well, the Electoral Commission managed to prevent the court from hearing our what was famously called an amicus brief. Of course, the court suggested that we were not a neutral party to the matter. And we held a different position, that where finance mattered, where issues of savings, economic savings mattered, we thought that there were critical issues that the EC to answer, but much more so because was the need for us to think that in a pandemic situation, you probably were better served if you had a register that was wholly useful. You didn't need to commit persons to go and mass register and expose people to the pandemic. But underlining this, our brief, our amicus brief, which we filed in court, was also the point to be made that the Electoral Commission may well be constitutionally clothed to undertake elections. and may have discretionary power. But we argue that even great legal minds have suggested that where constitutionally mandated bodies have discretionary power, they should not be seen to be exercising them in a manner that would, derail from sound public policy, and which was really our case. And so we were party to these conversations. We still think that even though the Electoral Commission has managed to convince the executive, which was very much interested, I mean, the ruling party was pretty much interested in the new register. The processes have not necessarily been without any incident. I mean, not too long ago, I think 2 or 3 days ago. Actually, before the incidents I'm referring to that happened 2-3 days ago, there have been pockets of, skirmishes. And these skirmishes are born out of the fact that even though the Electoral Commission believes that they want to produce a very transparent, if you like, legitimate register, they at the same time are asking people who do not have the requisite identity cards to be vouched for. So essentially, if a person doesn't have any of the, either a Ghanaian passport or a national ID, then somebody else who may have registered should be able to vouch for them. Of course, people argue that you were going to create a business for people who were going to vouch for people. And what it meant was that there were going to be clashes, because somehow people who perceive others not to belong to the particular electoral area may raise objections. Unfortunately, that has happened in some instances, and there have been some, turbulence in terms of political violence, and the Home Minister was found 2 days ago firing warning shots in the air, ostensibly to prevent persons she perceived were ineligible. And so that is the situation in Ghana right now. The Electoral Commission believes that it has registered close to 8 million Ghanaians in 2 weeks. If the trend continues, what it means is that it is likely to register possibly 16 million persons onto the national electoral base, which is not significantly different from what existed before, for which they claim that the electoral register was bloated. So there are moving parts of the conversations in Ghana, and we can only wish ourselves well. We have been calling on the president to sanction the minister who fired warning shot, because this indeed is the first time. It's never, I don't know in our history whether this has actually happened, but it's the first time to see a sitting minister, and a minister who handles a big portfolio, by the way. Almost 2 billion Ghana cedis. That's an enormous amount of money. Not that she's very competent, by the way, but she's a key member of the party, and we submit that her actions have brought untoward disrepute to the presidency, the people of the ruling party, and indeed Ghana. It's been 48 hours since this action happened, and the president hasn't done a thing yet. Almost all civil-minded persons, including the Peace Council leaders, lawyers, security analysts, have all condemned the actions and have called for her to either resign or be sacked. I've just made a tweet this morning that the president is still within the jurisdiction before he travels to Mali tomorrow to mediate in a tense situation as well. And we've been calling on the president to put his house in order before he tries to solve someone else's trouble in Mali. So these are the moving conversations in the country as we speak. And I probably will leave it here. But just to say that we wish ourselves well. And if there are any questions from any quarters, I'll be happy to answer them as best as I can.
Thank you very much, Franklin. Let me just ask you maybe a couple of questions before we continue. What should be the focus of civil society, in Ghana and in the region on the upcoming elections? Well,
first of all, I'll say vigilance. And in terms of vigilance, the there's a think tank called the Center for Democratic Development. They have had enormous experience in putting up an observer group called CODEO. It's a coalition of organizations that observe elections. I wish they had a lot more money so that they can expand their 100-member observer-based group right now to probably 1,000. And that's what I'd wish, that the likes of the entities that fund political activism on the continent or in the region should give them more money, because 100 persons are not enough. There are so many registration centers and they may be stretched. But of course, we are happy that they are doing this job. What it means is that other civil society actors should also be helping, which is what we've been doing, by the way. I mean, we've been very, very active in this process. At every point in time, when there are challenges to what we believe is commonsensical, we raise our voices and then we act upon them as well. So civil society should act and be ready watchdogs. And that's what I'll say. Ibrahim, are you there?
Ibrahima, are you there? Okay, I think Ibrahima may be having some technical issues.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, yeah, he's back. Yeah.
Yes, you said you had another.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. My second question is, considering really the state of the pandemic and the government's response mechanisms, do you think that elections should be really a priority amidst this health crisis?
You know, the theme for this conversation is about safeguarding citizens' mandates. And so somehow the questions would be, how do you balance safeguarding citizens' mandates, which they have to express anyway, against livelihoods and against, the challenges of a pandemic? It's a critical question, and it finds one between a rock and a hard place. I could have told everybody, and I think the Imani's position has always been, and indeed a lot more society position in Ghana, had been that, why don't you minimize the opportunities for infections by using the old register, which meant that we are potentially going to just look for about 1.5 million persons whom you could space for over a month to register and add to the electoral roll, rather than mobilize close to 18 million persons in tight spaces who are not observing any of the protocols at all, in spite of what the Electoral Commission says, and then giving opportunistic situations for infections. So clearly, of course, then the counterintuitive question someone will ask is, what if the pandemic is still with us during the elections? Because the elections are supposed to be held somewhere in December. Well, the answer to that is, we could space the elections over a number of days anyway. The real issue is not to jeopardize citizens' mandate, which must be expressed, because the Constitution must be seen to be guaranteeing seamless, if you like, either the current government gets the nod, and even that if the current government should get the nod, there must be some transitional arrangement. So whether the opposition gets the nod, there must be some transitional arrangement effective January 7th. So someone would have said, let's sacrifice the elections on the altar of the expediency against the pandemic. But right-based persons would also say, well, look, you are creating a vacuum if you allow the elections to be postponed, and then all of a sudden we would have a stalemate. Of course, the pandemic is a near war situation, but in this case, it is manageable. So the direct answer to your question is, we should have chosen pragmatism over the brute force. And trust me, I've never seen a very stubborn electoral commission in my life, in my 44-year life, since I started monitoring elections. If there was any definition of one electoral body that was very stubborn, and this is the one we have in Ghana. But as I said not long ago, we wish everybody well. We just hope that they would come up with a clean register, which I don't believe, by the way, because close to 30-40% of the register will be made up of persons who may be ineligible because they've been vouched for by other characters rather than the strict process which they promised for us anyway.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Franklin, for those really great insights. À présent, j'aimerais inviter M. Wodjo Fini Traoré à nous entretenir de la situation de la Côte d'Ivoire et à nous aider à mieux comprendre les menaces potentielles que pourrait constituer une élection en pleine pandémie de la COVID-19 sur le mandat des citoyens ivoiriens. La situation en Côte d'Ivoire, M. Traoré, est-elle similaire à celle du Ghana ou y a-t-il des spécificités? Donc, je rappelle aux participants que vous pouvez dès à présent saisir vos questions et contributions dans la fonctionnalité chat, donc la messagerie sur cette plateforme. Donc, sans plus tarder, M. Traoré, vous avez la parole. Allô, M. Traoré, vous nous entendez?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Wojo, please check your mic. In case you're speaking, you may be on mute.
C'est bon?
Oui, M. Traoré, on vous reçoit.
Oui, merci bien. Merci. Effectivement, je voudrais vous remercier pour l'opportunité que vous nous parler du processus électoral d'Afrique de l'Ouest et particulièrement en Côte d'Ivoire. La question qui a été soulevée tout à l'heure, c'est de savoir est-ce que la pandémie dite COVID-19 peut avoir des répercussions en Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais vous rappeler que cette pandémie, dès qu'elle s'est déclarée, le gouvernement ivoirien a mis en place une riposte à la fois sanitaire, politique et culturelle, en tenant compte des élections. Et le président de la commission électorale indépendante, en échange avec le gouvernement, a pris des dispositions pratiques. Aujourd'hui, je peux vous dire que au niveau de la lutte contre la pandémie, les dispositions sont en train d'être prises pour que le processus électoral ne souffre d'aucune difficulté. Ce qui pourrait être dit, c'est que la première phase, dans le cadre du processus électoral, je veux parler du cadre, la phase avant les élections, la phase juridique, l'organisation d'un certain nombre d'activités comme l'enrôlement des électeurs, c'est déjà passé. Elle a eu lieu, mais en tenant compte des mesures barrières. Le gouvernement ivoirien a demandé que tous ceux qui doivent aller s'enrôler sur les listes électorales doivent être protégés. Port obligatoire, respect de la distanciation sociale, lavage obligatoire des mains. Et donc, un décret a été pris par la suite, un arrêté, pour demander que 50 personnes par, par zone soient acceptées pour s'inscrire sur les listes, en respectant les 1 mètre entre les citoyens. Ce qui a été fait avec beaucoup de difficultés, ça je vous le dis clairement, avec beaucoup de difficultés, parce que pour les citoyens, c'est au masque. Tous les citoyens ne savent pas ce que c'est que 1 mètre. Donc, il a fallu encore expliquer, il a fallu encore travailler, il a fallu encore interpeller les gens. Il a fallu que les organisations de la société civile se mettent à sensibiliser les populations, se mettent à expliquer l'enjeu de cette maladie, se mettent aussi à expliquer que nous ne pouvons pas créer un vide, donc un vide juridique, nous sommes obligés d'aller aux élections. Tant que nous ne mettons pas en place, tant que nous ne faisons pas un bon enrôlement des électeurs, nous ne pouvons pas avoir un fichier. Donc, voici un peu ce que nous avons imaginé en Côte d'Ivoire. Et aujourd'hui, la commission électorale indépendante, et avec donc cette tâche, donc inscrire les électeurs donc, sur 2 à 3 reports, des réaménagements, des difficultés. Ce que je pourrais dire, contrairement à ce qui s'est passé au Ghana, c'est que la commission électorale indépendante, avec l'appui du gouvernement, fait des réaménagements concernant donc le calendrier électoral. Le calendrier électoral aujourd'hui a été donc diffusé prenant en compte la COVID, lançant donc un appel à tous les citoyens de rester, entre autres, port obligatoire de masque, le respect d'1 mètre entre les citoyens et bien sûr le lavage obligatoire. Donc, voici comment nous avons pu passer donc cette première étape, qui consiste donc à faire donc un enrôlement des électeurs inclusif, démocratique et ouvert. Mais bien sûr, il faut tirer les leçons, il y a des faiblesses ça et là, mais aujourd'hui, je peux vous dire que nous passons donc à une autre étape. C'est un peu ce que je peux dire sur la secrétaire ivoirienne, cher frère Ibrahim Amadou Niang.
Merci, merci, grand frère. Alors, je voulais juste poser quelques questions. La première question, c'est, est-ce que tu peux nous parler un tout petit peu du climat politique général en Côte d'Ivoire et comment cela pourrait peut-être impacter les élections?
Alors, nous avons une situation toute particulière. Hein, toute particulière, depuis février avec un dialogue politique. Comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, une élection, c'est 3 phases. La phase avant les élections, le moment des élections après les élections. La phase avant les élections, c'est le cadre juridique, la situation politique, le débat ouvert, le positionnement de la société civile. Donc, un dialogue avait été convoqué par personnel, le Premier ministre Amadou en associant tous les partis politiques, en associant les organisations de la société civile, en associant aussi les partenaires techniques et financiers. Que le dialogue s'est bien déroulé jusqu'à ce que certains partis se sont retirés de cette phase qui a abouti donc à un communiqué créant donc ou mettant en place la commission électorale indépendante. Le PDC s'est retiré, le principal parti s'est retiré, d'autres partis politiques s'est retirés, ont contesté la création donc de cette commission électorale. Vraiment aller plus loin, à continuer donc à mettre en place cette commission avec les différents membres qui ont été identifiés, les différents membres qui ont pris leur place au sein de cette commission électorale indépendante. Donc, cette commission électorale indépendante est dirigée par le ministre Koulibaly hier, qui a continué de travailler. Mais les partis politiques, tels que le PCRD et d'autres partis politiques, ont refusé donc de discuter. Donc, le premier, pour me résumer sur la situation ivoirienne, le premier couac, donc le premier contentieux, on pourrait présager, il est lié donc bien sûr à la mise en place de la commission électorale. Donc, un certain nombre de partis politiques comme le BDC, comme EDF, les partis proches du président Laurent Gbagbo ont refusé d'y siéger, donc ont refusé toute action. Et nous leur avons rappelé qu'il faut donc les négocier, continuer de discuter. Mais en même temps, les organisations de la société civile avaient appelé l'État de Côte d'Ivoire auprès bien sûr de la Cour des droits de l'homme, pour la Cour demandé à la Côte d'Ivoire de revoir donc son modèle de commission indépendante en y intégrant tous les partis politiques, en y intégrant bien sûr les organisations de la société civile, en intégrant bien sûr, en ayant une commission électorale équilibrée. Les débats. Ce que je peux dire aujourd'hui, pour me résumer, c'est que nous pouvons considérer ça comme un premier contentieux. Le premier contentieux que nous avons en Côte d'Ivoire, il est lié à la mise en place de la commission électorale indépendante. On continue toujours de travailler, et continue toujours de travailler. Aujourd'hui, est contesté par un certain nombre de partis, tels que le PDCI, tels que les partis proches du président Laurent Gbagbo, tels que certaines organisations aussi de la société civile, qui effectivement, on continue toujours de contester cette commission. Voici un peu de façon ramassée la situation que nous avons en Côte d'Ivoire. Et la commission continue toujours de travailler, malgré le fait que certains partis politiques contestent sa légitimité, malgré le fait que certaines organisations de la société civile contestent sa légitimité, la commission électorale indépendante continue donc à dérouler son plan d'organisation des élections jusqu'au 31 octobre. Et la première phase de cette phase préélectorale, c'est l'enrôlement des électeurs. L'enrôlement des électeurs s'est fait avec beaucoup de couacs. Malheureusement, avec la pandémie dite COVID-19, il fallait donc faire des réadaptations, faire des réajustements de ces réajustements qui ont été faits et le gouvernement a communiqué là-dessus. Aujourd'hui, je peux vous dire que le principal problème de la Côte d'Ivoire est sur les partis politiques, les IRA et quelques organisations de la société civile qui contestent encore la légitimité de cette commission indépendante. On souhaite dans laquelle nous nous trouvons.
Merci, merci beaucoup. Alors, la dernière question avant d'inviter les collègues à poser des questions, c'est est-ce qu'aujourd'hui la société civile ivoirienne, au vu du contexte actuel, devrait faire les choses de la même manière? C'est-à-dire, par exemple, est-ce que l'éducation civique et électorale se fera de la même manière? Est-ce qu'on travaillera de la même façon sur les questions de suivi de programmes et du discours des campagnes? Réellement, en dehors de la facilitation du dialogue politique, qu'est-ce que la société civile peut faire dans un contexte pareil pour mener des actions pertinentes, tout en respectant, bien entendu, les mesures barrières?
Alors, je crois que la société civile, dans le dialogue politique, a été divisée. Une partie est partie indépendante, une autre a contesté. Il s'agit de voici le retour du dialogue politique pour intégrer ce démembrement de la société civile, ou en tout cas ce démembrement parti politique. Ça va se faire politiquement. Il faut trouver des solutions. Quel pourrait être le rôle de la société civile? Je crois que c'est un rôle avant-gardiste. C'est un rôle de vigilance. C'est un rôle, je dirais, de contrôle. Un rôle qui permettrait aux citoyens. Donc, commencez donc par faire une bonne éducation civique des populations. Que nos compatriotes acceptent de participer massivement à la phase d'enrôlement des élèves. Je peux vous rappeler que malgré le fait qu'un certain nombre de partis politiques, l'organisation de la société civile n'ait pas reconnu la légitimité de cette commission électorale indépendante, on lançait un appel tous, sans distinction, enrôlement des élèves. Nous n'avons jamais vu ça en Côte d'Ivoire. Tout le monde était d'accord pour s'inscrire sur la liste. Cette phase 3 fois reportée, 3 fois réajustée, et donc d'être clôturée. De mon point de vue, la phase s'est bien déroulée. C'est ce qu'on veut. C'est ce comportement citoyen-là qu'on doit demander et qu'on doit encourager. Et ne pas d'être, je dirais, à la remorque des partis politiques. Parce que les partis politiques s'entendent toujours. Et c'est les organisations de la société civile qui perdent. Et donc, c'est les populations qui perdent aussi. Et donc, nous avons, en tant qu'anciens des organisations de la société civile, nous avons demandé aux organisations de la société d'aller plus loin, de réinventer un peu la stratégie, de voir comment, malgré le fait que certains partis politiques testent de cette institution, mais je crois que tout le monde ira aux élections. Parce que vous rassurez. Et donc, comment les citoyens qui ont accepté d'aller se faire enrôler pourraient être assistés par la population, par l'organisation de la société civile, pour voir si son nom a été bien écrit, pour voir si, en tout cas, en ce qui concerne le contentieux sur les élections, tout fait pour avoir une liste électorale démocratique, inclusive et ouverte. C'est ça qui est important. Et la deuxième chose que la société civile doit faire, c'est de mettre en place, je dirais, une stratégie de monitoring, monitorer les violences électorales, voir comment on pourrait accompagner tout ce qui se passe aujourd'hui. On a déjà des discours politiques qui s'enflamment. On a la situation politique qui s'enflamme. Comment interpeller? Mettre en place un code de bonne conduite des partis politiques et des candidats. Nous l'avons fait en 2010 et en 2011, j'en étais le président. Je leur ai demandé de mettre en place cet espace-là qui va permettre de monitorer le processus électoral, d'interpeller les partis politiques sur les propos incendiaires, dangereux, qui pourraient déséquilibrer les électeurs, qui pourraient démobiliser les électeurs. Ils sont en train de voir, avec l'appui de nos amis de NDI, avec l'appui de nos amis de l'USAID, comment accompagner la société civile, effectivement, elle puisse jouer son rôle d'avant-gardiste, son rôle d'interpellation, son rôle de gardien du processus électoral. Et si tout ça est bien fait, bien solutionné, sûr que les élections sont donc se dérouler. Et je reviens encore là-dessus. Je leur dis toujours, ne vous mettez pas à la remorque. Ne soyez pas des partis politiques bistes. Vous allez dans une institution électorale indépendante, faites votre travail. fait tout pour que la société civile, ceux qui n'ont pas pu intégrer la commission électorale indépendante, aient confiance en vous. Que l'électeur ait la possibilité de s'inscrire sur la liste électorale et ait la possibilité d'être bien éduqué. Donc, après donc, le monitoring, nous allons passer à la phase d'éducation. Mon cher ami Niang, le problème de la Côte d'Ivoire, c'est qu'on fait les mêmes choses, les mêmes erreurs. Moi, j'ai ma 5e, 6e élection, c'est les mêmes choses. Pas de moyens pour payer la société civile, pas de moyens pour donc, les populations, pas de moyens pour éduquer suffisamment la population sur le processus électoral, voter, comment voter, pour qui voter, comment apprécier le programme électoral. Et nous sommes, moi en tant qu'aujourd'hui, pas la tête d'une organisation de la société civile, mais conseiller d'un ministre qui intervient dans le processus électoral, je suis membre du comité technique qui est en train d'accompagner le processus électoral, demander que les moyens soient mobilisés pour que les organisations de la société civile fassent une bonne phase de monitoring, fassent aussi une bonne phase d'éducation des populations. Les élections antérieures en Côte d'Ivoire ont montré 6% et 10% de bulletins nuls. C'est tout. Une élection où on a dans le fichier électoral 6 millions d'électeurs. C'est tout. 600 000 personnes ne savent pas. Et ce n'est pas normal. Et donc aujourd'hui, nous sommes en train de faire un plaidoyer, un lobby pour que effectivement les ressources soient trouvées, que la période soit longue. Au lieu de donner 2 semaines à la société civile pour éduquer les populations, nous sommes en train de voir comment rallonger cette période à 1 mois ou à 1 mois et demi pour sensibiliser les populations. Une chose importante aussi, c'est de tout faire pour que la phase d'éducation civile ne se passe pas au même moment que la campagne. Les années passées, c'est sûr que nous avons droit donc à un discours qui était confus. Nos populations sont à 70% là. Au moment où les partis politiques battent campagne, au même moment là que les organisations de la société civile, financées par le PNUD, sont sur le terrain. Dans le langage, les propos, et ça ne marche pas. Aussi, les questions qui sont, de notre point de vue, importantes, qu'il faille soulever pour qu'effectivement la Côte d'Ivoire aille vers des élections justes, libres, ouvertes et apaises. Et je rappelle que les contentions restent politiques. Il faudra sûrement voir comment on pourrait donc réduire ces contentieux-là pour que les...
Merci. Merci beaucoup, monsieur Traoré. Vous avez bien insisté sur la sensibilisation des électeurs. Je pense que même Franklin en a un peu parlé aussi. C'est extrêmement important, la sensibilisation des électeurs, pas seulement sur le processus, mais aussi sur cette situation sanitaire. La bonne éducation électorale, les stratégies de monitoring des discours, monitoring des violences, etc., le code de bonne conduite des partis et candidats. Vous avez aussi parlé de l'interpellation des partis politiques sur les propos incendiaires et bien entendu aider les citoyens à apprécier le programme électoral. Donc autant de suggestions qui sont très bien notées. Merci beaucoup. So really at this stage, we are going to open the floor for questions from participants on the call. So let me just check. Omolara, do we have any questions?
Mr. Ibrahima.
Hello?
Yes, hello. Please, can you?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Currently, we don't have a... Yes, I think we have one question from our viewers from Facebook. A colleague is asking, concerning the case of the...
Hello?
Of yes, hello, Lara. Can you hear us? Hello, Mr. Ibrahima, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, please. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. Concerning the question on Code of Ivory Coast, we have a question where a participant is asking what is actually done in terms of COVID-19, that you have discussed a lot about violence and the electoral process in itself. But the question is, what has been done to protect citizens from the pandemic for the upcoming election? In addition to that, we have also a question from a participant in the chat box, Dr. Emmanuel Kumi from Ghana. He's asking, what do you think are the implications of the COVID pandemic on the electoral processes and civic space in Ghana? So those are the two questions we have from Facebook and from the chat. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then if there's any more question, we can come back at the later stage. So I'll probably invite Franklin to answer the question on the implications of the COVID-19 on civic space in Ghana. So I think, Franklin, have you heard the question?
Yes, I have a question. Ideally, I would say that clearly the people ordinarily should be scared. But I think what I see is the massing up to vote only tells me one thing, that people are interested in procuring the card, the voter card, not necessarily just to vote, but also as a means of identification. Because don't forget, our courts ruled that the old voter ID was ineligible, as well as birth certificates were ineligible as well. So what it means is that people are sacrificing people just do not care. That's the way I see it. And so it's a net positive, it's a net negative. I don't know how to say it. The impact is obviously is expected that people should be scared, but because people see these cards as legitimate, identities to be used to receive other services, is the only reason why people are defying the pandemic and registering anyway. I imagine during the main election, people still want to vote anyway. But it also may well be that, don't forget, Ghanaians are politically very active. And to the extent that people may be interested in securing these cards in the midst of a pandemic, only go to prove the point that they are very, very active. What they are very active over, I do not know. Whether they want to punish the people who have made them go through another means of going for a verification, or they just want to get the cards and use the cards or something else. But trust me, Ghanaians are very, very, very motivated to vote. And, which is why it's unfortunate that the incidents that are to scare persons on some of the places should be minimized. So that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin. Monsieur Traoré, nous avons une question d'un participant qui se demande en fait qu'est-ce qui est réellement fait en Côte d'Ivoire pour protéger les électeurs en direction d'élections qui vont se tenir dans un contexte de COVID-19. Allô, M. Traoré, vous êtes toujours avec nous?
Je vous attends. Vous m'entendez?
Voilà, c'est parfait. Vous avez entendu la question?
Vous pouvez la reprendre. Quelle pourrait être la contribution ou l'accompagnement de l'État pour aider les populations ivoiriennes à participer aux élections? C'est cela?
Oui, c'est-à-dire qu'est-ce qui est réellement fait pour protéger les électeurs en direction d'élections qui vont se dérouler dans un contexte de COVID-19? Quelles sont les mesures prises pour réellement protéger la santé des électeurs?
Oui, je l'ai dit tout à l'heure. Depuis le déclenchement de cette pandémie, l'État de Côte d'Ivoire a pris acte juridique. Le premier acte qui a été pris, c'est un décret dans l'état d'urgence sanitaire. L'état d'urgence sanitaire a aussi de prendre un décret pour le couvre-feu. Un mois de couvre-feu. Avant les élections, avant le processus électoral. Aujourd'hui, nous avons pris des arrêtés pour être isolés, désormais isolés. Nous n'avons plus de barrières qui ne permettraient pas aux populations à l'aise. Mais en même temps, quelle pourrait être l'influence sur les prochaines élections? La première phase auquel on était confronté, c'était l'enrôlement des électeurs. Première phase. Ce qui a été donc dit, en discussion avec la commission électorale indépendante, il a fallu donc protéger les citoyens. Tous ceux qui doivent se faire enrôler doivent avoir un masque, port obligatoire, respect de la distanciation sociale, 1 mètre, lavage obligatoire des mains. Et ça, aujourd'hui, c'est partout, dans les commerces, dans le transport, lors de l'enrôlement des électeurs. Ce qui nous a permis aujourd'hui de finir avec cette phase. Donc aujourd'hui, la Côte d'Ivoire, au même titre que tous les autres pays, a pris des mesures barrières importantes pour protéger sa population. on s'est dit, et bien sûr, la montée exponentielle de cas que nous avons en Côte d'Ivoire, nous ne sommes pas sûrs qu'au mois d'octobre, nous aurons vaincu cette pandémie. En même temps, on a la commission électorale indépendante de prendre toutes les décisions effectivement pour tenir les citoyens. Au départ, nous avions, avec donc le décret et les arrêtés, il était permis d'accepter 50 personnes qui pouvaient se faire enrouler en respectant les 1 mètre. Aujourd'hui, avec la nouvelle loi, on peut avoir des attroupements de 200 personnes en respectant toujours les 1 mètre. En respectant toujours les 1 mètre. Demain, si nous finissons tout le processus électoral, nous voulons aller aux élections, nous prendrons les dispositions utiles pour protéger tous les. Chaque électeur rentre dans un centre de vote et qui va voter dans un bureau de vote aura droit à un cache-nez, donc à un masque. Devant donc les bureaux de vote, on installera du matériel pour le lavage obligatoire des mains avec des gels hydroalcooliques et on fera tout pour que, entre les citoyens, les 1 mètre soient respectés et c'est obligatoire. Monnaie courante aujourd'hui en Côte d'Ivoire, partout dans tous les milieux où vous allez, chaque citoyen est obligé de porter donc un masque, est obligé de se laver les mains, est obligé effectivement d'avoir donc du gel hydroalcoolique. Les dispositions qui ont été prises par l'État de Côte d'Ivoire et donc du coup la CEI a réaménagé son programme pour effectivement respecter. En même temps, nous sommes allés plus loin. Je pense que c'est pour toute l'Afrique de l'Ouest. L'État de Côte d'Ivoire a mis en place un plan de riposte économique et financière pour aider les entreprises, pour aider les populations à comprendre que la survenue de cette maladie est l'intelligence de une situation qui nous est arrivée par les populations. Il faut trouver des ressources pour aider les entreprises à fonctionner. Il faut aider les populations. Pas de ressources. Arrêter de travailler pendant 2 mois, d'avoir des ressources pour reprendre leurs activités. Donc, comme je l'ai dit, notre ami du Ghana l'a dit tout à l'heure, ce n'est pas parce que nous avons la pandémie dans la région, dans votre pays, on va souffrir d'un vie juridique ou d'un vie constitutionnel. Non. On ne pourrait le justifier. Il faut tout faire pour vivre avec la maladie. On peut voir aujourd'hui l'expression. Nous devons vivre avec la maladie. Vivre avec la maladie, c'est travailler avec la maladie. En respectant de façon stricte les mesures barrières. Entre autres, port obligatoire du masque, respect de la distanciation sociale, donc 1 mètre, lavage obligatoire et main. Voici un peu ce que nous avons fait en Côte d'Ivoire. Aujourd'hui, la commission électorale indépendante a donc appuyé les organisations de la société civile pour les sensibiliser donc les populations.
Merci. Merci, M. Traoré. Merci beaucoup pour la réponse. Alors, nous avons 2 questions. Nous avons un commentaire de David Comla. Could you please allow David Comla to ask the question or make the comment?
David Shamala.
David Shamala, please. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Mr.
Yes, hello.
Yes,
Mr. David Shamala. Okay, let's take then Jibril's question. I think Jibril has their hand raised.
Okay.
Hello, Jibril, can you please?
Hello.
Yes, hello, Jibril, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning all. Actually, my observation is considering the regulations and by all agencies concerned of social distancing and everything. So here in Nigeria, we have a situation whereby the government is planning election in some part of the countries, whereas students are denied the right to go back and take their examinations. So what do you think civil society organizations should do in terms of balancing between the rights of the student and then the citizens' mandate in regards to election and then the fear of the pandemic? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jibril. Let's take a question from ABAC Foundation.
So, hello, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, sir. Yes, I also want to, yes, ABAC Foundation from Ghana. I also just want to ask concerning the COVID. There has been a lot of calls on the government of Ghana to release the senior high school student to the house. Again, we are also not clear. As civil society, we are not much clear. It's like we have divided civil society. Some are saying they should still be in school. Others are also saying they should come back to the house. Looking at the situation, I also want to find out what should be the position of civil society in Ghana on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other hand raised, or maybe we should first allow Franklin to, answer these two questions, and then we'll see if we still have time. Yes, please.
Okay, if I may just add additional question, and it will go to Franklin. So Franklin, just consider this question as well. I'm aware, and like you had presented, that the voter's ID card is tied to so many other services in Ghana, and I'm very much aware of that. I know how it works. And this is why most people, majority actually, have kind of made it a point of duty to get it at all cost, irrespective of the danger associated with COVID and the pandemic. So the question is, do you think shouldn't the government consider extending the registration of this ID card beyond elections? I mean, if I'm unable, we still have quite a number of Ghanaians locked out outside the country at this moment. So if I return to the country sometime next year, are there no processes through which I can still get this voter's ID card, so that people who would not naturally, go in for this card prior to elections can actually wait? Because really the pandemic is still out there, and people are defaulting on this, the threat of the pandemic just to get that card for other services like you have mentioned. So please, I would like to hear more insight from you on that. Thank you.
Well, Laura,
thank you. Yes, please, Franklin. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ibrahima. The answer to your question, Lara, is that ordinarily in any civilized environment, identity acquisition should be part of the processes of human organization. I mean, you don't need to wait for an election. You see, because what happens is that the politicians have perfected an act, the act of trying to deceive everybody to think that identity acquisition is so important that there must be multiplicity of them. It's the only reason why we've had multiplicity of identity systems. So the point really is that under normal circumstances, everybody should be able to acquire any identity they want, of course, actually with regards to what the law says, in normal times. But what I expected, probably what I'm expecting from your question is, beyond the registration process, we should allow people to acquire cards. The fact of the matter is that is actually the norm, that people should be able to walk to any district level office at all to register for their cards. But because somehow citizens have also laid back, they've not been able to actualize this right. And the politicians have found a way of making it look like a do-or-die affair. It's the only reason why people mess up. So we need a lot more education, and I'm sure WACSI may be willing to do that as well, maybe with the NCCE, to educate a lot more people to understand that acquisition of a voter ID is of right, and it is normal, it is required, and it is always not an event, it's a process. The other question that my good friend from the foundation asked about the division, if you like, of the civil society front. I'm not too sure about the division. I think it's just a contestation of ideas. My friend who runs the Africa Education Watch, who looks at education issues on the continent, Kofi Asare, believes that the science should guide us, and he doesn't think that we should delay the reopening of schools. I shared that view initially as well, but until it became apparent that even the people who are superintending and education themselves were running away from the virus. If our Minister of Education caught the virus, the health minister caught the virus. Excuse me, this cough is not a viral, it's not a virus cough, by the way. And all these people who caught the virus were running for cover. And they were just dumping our students into some schools, claiming they observe social protocols. Well, I changed my mind immediately when I realized that they were not getting the necessary PPEs, the protective equipment. But the exams have started already. All we've heard so far is 179 students have tested positive. What it means is that those are the students who have been tested. Ordinarily, every student should have been tested, at least, because the whole idea behind this virus is that it is the symptomatic carriers who actually spread it. So if 179 have been found, I submit that figure may actually be three times if they did a lot of testing. So it's not a question of civil society front being divided. It's a question of what I suspect to be pragmatism over what the government wants to, by all means, make sure that the president's graduates, as he calls them, would write exams, and then he will use that as part of his legacy in an election year to say, yeah, I got the students to write an exam and they passed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Franklin. And just before we move to the next session, I would just like to tell everyone on this call that there is a tool which is the Regional Electoral Integrity Portal, which is a portal managed by WACSI. And the objective behind this is to help civil society across West Africa share best electoral practice to do advocacy on key electoral issues. So maybe at a later stage, Omolara and colleagues will be able to give you more details by email or so. But I just wanted to flag that there is this very important tool which could be used in these very specific times to help civil society across the region, share resources and strategies. So at this stage, I would like to thank you very much, Franklin and Wojo, and thank everyone for the. Oh, sorry, somebody's asking me to repeat the tool name. I'll put it in the chat box. It's the electoral integrity tool, and I think our WACSI colleagues have just put the link on the chat box. So without further ado, I would like now to invite Omolara to please take over the moderation as we move towards the regional situation. So Omolara, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ibrahima, and thanks to Wojo Traore, and my good brother, Franklin Kujo, for those insightful comments and contributions to this conversation. Let's take it outside the countries a little bit. And I'm going to start with Olufunto, my sister of many years. Listening to Wojo and Franklin's, we could hear what the fears and situations are on the ground within these two countries that have made presentation. Permit me to say that we have about five to six countries holding one kind of elections or the other this year across West Africa, Nigeria being one. We have elections in Edo State and Ondo State, elections in Ghana, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Conakry, and then Cote d'Ivoire. and listening to the first two presenters, issues around fear of legitimacy vacuum, you know, possible constitutional crisis, and, you know, and these are some of the issues that countries are considering, which is making them, you know, to want to go ahead with election. You know, you don't want to keep people beyond their mandate, and you don't want the right-based people, you know, proponents to start asking questions around, we haven't given them the mandate beyond, for example, in Ghana, January 7th, something has to happen. The cost and the complexity of transitional arrangement, should we have to continue, or, you know, let people run beyond the mandate for which they were brought to power. These are some of the pockets of issues that is being raised. Why, irrespective of the pandemic, we need to move on with our lives, and this includes deepening our various our democracies in our countries. Funto, the question I want to ask is, we have kind of scouts around the continent and of indeed the world. We know we have some examples that we could learn from, and I trust yourself and your institution, because this is what you do day in, day out. What is happening out there beyond West Africa to countries that have held elections? What can we learn from them? Quite a number of them have held elections during this pandemic. What has been the outcome that you have observed within your organizations and your able self? What can our countries in West Africa learn from this process, or what should we expect? Funto, you have the floor.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you very much as well to Waxy for inviting me to participate in this webinar. I hope I'm clear. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Okay. Thank you very much for painting, you know, the bigger picture for West Africa. But much as you may want to keep it outside the sub-region, I like to say that this year is the West African year. Last year was the Southern African year. So indeed, West Africa is where we have all the focus for elections taking place this year. That said, I think there are very common threads that we can very quickly identify that most electoral commissions and civil society organizations are faced with as they go towards election. Like you've rightly said, you've seen elections in Burundi, you've seen elections in Malawi. In Burundi, within a week, we saw what happened with the former president, the immediate past president passing on, and the indications around the fact that he most likely died of COVID. And that was after holding very massive, his party holding massive campaigns where the health protocols were not respected. Malawi as well, you saw exactly the same thing, massive protests ahead of the elections, and then huge rallies. And just, I think last week or the week before, the new president was interviewed and he goes on to say, oh, we have a massive problem on our hands. And the BBC, you know, correspondent had to ask, but you ran huge campaigns where you did not respect the protocols. Now you are in power and it's become a problem. So you see, this is the dilemma that the electoral context presents to everyone. Very quickly, I think the first question is the one you raised. Do we proceed? Do we not? I think the face that the face that the epidemic has come to, you can see that globally, most countries are opening up, and even the Africa Center for Disease Control has issued guidelines for countries to consider as they move, you know, into the next phase of removing the restrictions. So that's the first thing to say, that most countries are opening up, and it's then difficult to insist that the electoral space should remain closed. However, I mean, whilst you choose to say you must keep it open, what are the big questions? How do you keep it safe for all? And how do you guarantee the key principles guiding democratic election, universal suffrage, equal opportunity for everybody, and inclusive elections? West Africa, the elections for this year present like a double-faced challenge, because the epidemic is one, the other is the level of insecurity in the different countries. Burkina Faso, for instance, after postponing some part of the registration, resumed registration, but the commission agreed that they could not register voters in, I think, 10 regions. I'm getting an indication my internet is unstable. Am I still clear?
Yes, you're very clear.
Thank you, Tony. So, I mean, that's the first thing. You know, you then begin to ask yourself, this level of insecurity matched with the pandemic. And then you've also seen recent trends in protests emanating from general dissatisfaction. So look at what is going on in Mali. Malawi, before the court judgment, you know, was about people being in the streets for months on end. So there's a lot more civil society activity, but at the same time, you also seem to see that there is gradual steps being taken to also restrict the space because of the protests. And then you also see politically motivated restrictions. Countries like Uganda saying campaigns would only be online. What does that really mean? How do you guarantee equal opportunity when you insist everybody has to move their campaigns online? Is the incumbent also going to be campaigning online? And how do you draw the line between when the president goes out for his, day-to-day activities and when it's a campaign? So those are some of the questions. How do you also look at campaign spendings now that you have countries looking for monies to address the issue of the pandemic? So when politicians begin to make donations, how do you separate those, from the bigger issues around party and campaign finance? So are we going to be seeing more monetization of the electoral processes? I don't want to even delve into the deeper issues around how do you keep the process safe for all voters to ensure that people respect the protocols. There's also the questions around the credibility of the voter register. You heard it from the two speakers today. Guinea as well, ahead of the previous elections that were held amidst the pandemic, was sitting with a big controversy around the credibility of the register. And the commission is saying, because we have such little time, we do not intend to undertake a review of the voters register before the presidential election. Let's not go into the whole discussion about, the controversies about the president seeking another term in office. So questions around the credibility of the register as well then becomes an issue. Lastly, the question of how do you guarantee participation of vulnerable groups? Very recently, you heard the INEC Nigeria chairman talking about, yes, there'll be procedures in place to check voters' temperature. Then the next question was, if you have voters that show symptoms, what will be the actions taken for them? And so far, I've heard it from Ghana, I've heard it from Nigeria. Malawi as well said, we could not take any steps for people who showed symptoms. They had to be returned home. Consider the fact that Africa is gradually reaching the peak of the epidemic. So if you're looking at elections that will be held over the next 1 or 2 months, are we not going to see a significant number of situations where voters will show symptoms? Look at the insecurity as well in West Africa, where you have a lot of internally displaced people. What steps are going to be taken for such people who probably cannot travel at this time to go to their constituencies to register to vote, but they will be in their camps? What procedures are put in place for such people to ensure that they are not, they are not disenfranchised? So, well, after identifying some of these challenges, let me just think around questions around opportunities and some good practices that we seem to have seen. There's a lot more media engagement. Civil society now has a global space thanks to the internet. Apart from countries like Ethiopia, where since the 1st of July, internet has been restricted. If you do not have such restrictions, civil society then has this huge opportunity to reconsider the models of engagement and advocacy. The most important thing, therefore, is for civil society to sit and then also ask, how do we combat the issue of disinformation and misinformation at this time where anybody that has a smartphone has access to the internet, can make a video, can make a drama skit and put it out? What will civil society be doing? The other thing is looking at the trends of dissatisfaction and the different protests coming up. Does this present an opportunity for civil society to refocus our election and the politics in the region to be more issue-based? Are we going to now, refocus? Because now politicians don't have that opportunity to move around so freely and to engage in the door-to-door campaigning where they give out food and they give out materials. So what is civil society doing to ensure that our campaigns now become issue-based? Because I think these are roles that civil society can play. Then, sorry, I think I'm out of time, but give me 2 minutes. Also the need to then begin to look at strengthening the role of citizen observers as we move towards the elections. The elections that have so far been held, like in Malawi, there were no international observers. Francis will speak after me, and I must say that I congratulate Francis because he has a big job on his hands. He's the man of the continent for this year. But it's also important to know, what is ECOWAS going to do to strengthen that role of civil society groups? The other thing I wanted to raise is it is now time for us to begin to refocus attention on establishing credible civic registries in our countries. All of the questions we are raising about the credibility of the voters register, that is a symptom of something bigger. So the question is, how do we take it one notch higher and ask ourselves the bigger question? For countries that have credible civic registries at this time, countries are now looking at, is there any way we can just merge the data we have online and people can go online and verify and indicate that this is where I would like my registration to be moved? But because our countries do not have those credible registries, we are still faced with that issue of everybody has to go and register in person. And therefore the challenges we are facing.
Funto, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just hold the other line of thought. I will come back to you. Dr. Francis, Funto has really painted the ground quite red. She's raised a lot of issues, and I'm reading the chat box as Funto makes a presentation. People are talking about the implications around low voters turnout, voter apathy, which we normally experience even under normal circumstances, being outside pandemic. Electoral violence has become, synonymous to our elections almost every other year. Within this current pandemic, we are seeing increasing shrinking of civic space, where government, Wojo mentioned it repeatedly, that government has put out one decree or the other, all around restrictions of movement, and we can't gather like we normally do. Oppositions and even the incumbents may not have the opportunity to go through their campaign trail, most of which ought to have started by now. And we have restriction of movement, low engagement between voters and leaders, political parties, as we used to have under normal circumstance. And yes, so I agree with Funto that ECOWAS has a lot on its hands this year. I am one of those civil society actors that have always participated or joined ECOWAS in its observer mission. And I'm thinking here now, Dr. Francis, how do we go about this? External international observers, and I know ECOWAS have a number of levels of observation, from advanced team to medium advanced and, you know, short term or observer. What are the plans for this year? What do you see as ECOWAS, and what should we expect? Mr. Francis, you have the floor now. If you're speaking, you may be on mute.
D'accord. Merci, Madame, pour ces interrogations. Je pense que mes prédécesseurs ont déjà abordé le sujet d'une manière ou d'une autre, mais en tant qu'organisation régionale, c'est normal que vous nous interpellez pour savoir ce que nous préparons, ce que nous avons comme dispositif pour faire face à cette pandémie et pouvoir garantir des élections crédibles et la participation des citoyens. Je voudrais d'abord remercier les organisateurs pour m'avoir associé à cette rencontre. La question de Covid et de l'impact de cette pandémie est une question très importante et qui a nécessité beaucoup de réflexion ces derniers temps. Et la CEDEAO, avec le réseau des commissions électorales et au CIWA, avait déjà pris la mesure de la question. Et le 15 avril, nous avions organisé une conférence, une visioconférence avec les présidents de commissions électorales intéressés par les élections cette année pour avoir leur avis sur les difficultés et les solutions qu'ils prévoient pour cette pandémie. Alors, l'idée essentielle de cette réflexion, c'était de savoir la tenue des élections à bonne date. Est-elle possible ou non? C'était ça la question principale en avril. Et la plupart nous avaient dit qu'en avril, c'était tôt pour apprécier les possibilités d'organisation à bonne date ou non, qu'il fallait attendre fin mai pour pouvoir mieux apprécier. Mais au cours de cette rencontre, les problèmes ont été soulevés par les intéressés, les présidents de commissions électorales. Donc, certains problèmes ont déjà été soulevés par Fonto et les autres. Mais il y avait les problèmes d'organisation pratique des élections. Organisation pratique des élections, c'est-à-dire des problèmes de suspension de chronogramme. Concrètement, la formation des agents électoraux, toutes ces activités avaient été suspendues. Ensuite, il y avait un problème de coût additionnel de ces élections dû à la pandémie qui a été soulevé. Il y a le problème de la participation des électeurs parce qu'on n'est pas sûr vu que les mouvements ont été restreints. Alors, tout ce dont nous parlons soulève la question des droits fondamentaux des citoyens. Comment allons-nous garantir les droits fondamentaux des citoyens pendant cette période où il y a la pandémie, où on restreint les mouvements des citoyens, on restreint les rassemblements? Comment un candidat voulant faire connaître sa politique peut être restreint dans l'incapacité de rassembler, de faire des meetings? Alors, nous avons écouté les problèmes des commissions électorales et ensuite, nous avons aussi donné l'opportunité aux commissions électorales qui ont quand même essayé d'organiser pendant ou qui avaient en vue d'organiser les élections pendant cette période. Il s'agissait du Bénin, du Mali et de la Guinée. Donc, le Bénin, par exemple, nous a dit qu'ils ont demandé aux gens, aux candidats, ils ont pris des dispositions pour qu'il n'y ait pas de meeting. Ils ont pris des dispositions pour la distanciation. Ils ont pris les dispositions pour le respect de toutes les règles sanitaires. Mais nous avons constaté, parce que après la première visioconférence, le 11 juin, nous avons fait une autre visioconférence pour faire le point des difficultés qu'ils ont eues à énumérer. Où est-ce qu'on en est? Est-ce que les élections pourront avoir lieu ou non à bonne date? Et comme Funto l'a dit, Mais toutes les commissions ont affirmé que non, ils ont repris l'enrôlement, ils ont repris les activités, ils ont réadapté leur chronogramme pour pouvoir organiser les élections à bonne date. Donc, voilà, à cause des délais constitutionnels et surtout à cause du fait que certains chefs d'État sont en fin de mandat et repousser les élections peut vouloir dire leur donner opportunité de rester encore plus au pouvoir. Donc, nous avons toutes ces questions-là qui étaient des défis à... Alors, si je dois parler des leçons apprises des pays comme la Guinée-Bénin qui ont essayé d'organiser les élections, nous avons tous appris qu'il y a eu des décès pendant ces élections, pendant l'organisation. Nous avons perdu le président de la commission électorale de Guinée qui a organisé les élections et a perdu sa vie. Et il y a plein d'autres aussi qui, parce qu'ils ont eu des contacts, ont péri dans cette activité. Alors, les pays qui ont organisé nous ont dit qu'ils ont plus de dispositions pour pulvériser les bureaux de vote, par exemple. Au Mali, par exemple, il y a eu les gilets verts qui ont aidé, c'est la société civile qui a aidé à distribuer de l'eau, à approvisionner en eau et à sensibiliser. Donc, voilà des activités qu'ils ont eu à faire pendant l'organisation des élections en Covid. Mais il est important de soulever que la question du taux de participation est une question qui a été récurrente parce qu'il est évident que si on doit respecter les consignes sanitaires, beaucoup ne pourront pas sortir pour aller voter. Donc, voilà une question qui a été soulevée. Et pour ça, nous avions recommandé que, d'abord, pour le 11 juin, nous avons pris la disposition d'inviter, d'associer l'Organisation ouest-africaine de santé. Le directeur même de l'Organisation ouest-africaine de la santé a participé et nous a montré les statistiques, les risques, et il a insisté sur le fait que le risque même, ce n'est pas dans la période électorale, que le risque, c'est pendant la préparation. Et que si pendant la préparation, les gens prennent les dispositions, il y aura moins de risques le jour des élections. Mais l'expérience a prouvé que le jour des élections, si les distanciations ne sont pas respectées dans le bureau de vote, nous aurons des problèmes à... Donc, certains pays comme la Corée du Sud, pour éviter qu'il y ait des regroupements, ils ont organisé des élections sur plusieurs jours. Ils ont organisé des élections avec des votes électroniques. Mais est-ce que nous avons ce dispositif, ma collègue Fonto l'a soulevé tout à l'heure, est-ce que nous avons ce dispositif ici? Nous n'avons pas. Donc, si en Afrique, vous décidez d'organiser des élections sur 3 jours, vous risquez de vous retrouver devant la Cour constitutionnelle après pour invalider ces élections. Donc, c'est pour ça que la CEDEAO insiste à ce que toute décision qui soit prise sur la base du consensus, sur la base inclusive. Et c'est ça ce sur quoi la CEDEAO insiste. Pour que si tout le monde s'entend pour organiser quand même ces élections pendant cette période de pandémie, il faut que tous les acteurs soient prêts à en assumer les conséquences. Donc, voilà le mot d'ordre de la CEDEAO. Maintenant, qu'est-ce que la CEDEAO prévoit? Nous avons, d'abord, il faut que je vous informe que la CEDEAO, exceptionnellement cette année, les 5 pays qui ont les élections ont reçu un soutien financier de la CEDEAO de $500 000 parce qu'on estime qu'à cause des coûts additionnels que va créer l'organisation de ces élections pendant cette pandémie, et nous avons décidé de donner un soutien substantiel à chaque État. Or, normalement, c'est sur requête que l'assistance financière doit être donnée. Mais cette fois-ci, on n'a pas eu besoin de requête, on a décidé de... nous sommes en train de réfléchir. Est-il possible de déployer des missions d'observation, des missions préélectorales? Actuellement, où je vous parle, la CEDEAO n'a pas pu déployer ces missions d'observation et ces missions préparatoires préélectorales dans les États compte tenu de la limitation des mouvements. Donc, la CEDEAO même est affectée. Et nous sommes en train de réfléchir, peut-on organiser des missions préélectorales par visioconférence? Donc, si c'est possible, il faudra organiser des rencontres avec tous les acteurs. Ça va demander beaucoup d'organisation logistique. Donc, toutes ces questions sont... Les missions d'observation elles-mêmes, comment va-t-on les organiser? Il y a eu des propositions où nous sommes en collaboration avec des organisations sous-régionales de la société civile comme le WANET. Est-ce qu'il ne faudrait pas développer des relations étroites avec des organisations sous-régionales sur le terrain pour pouvoir faire face à ces missions d'observation pendant cette période de Covid? Voilà des questions que nous posons. Hein. Donc, cette situation limite aussi la CEDEAO dans ses activités. Mais néanmoins, la CEDEAO, quand il y a urgence, il y a des décisions qui sont prises pour pouvoir quand même se déplacer. Vous voyez, par exemple, au Mali, il y a une délégation de haut niveau qui est allée. Et il faut des mesures spécifiques. Alors, il y a une question aussi des dispositions spécifiques aux aéroports de chaque État. Alors, si nous devons déployer des observateurs ou des missions, est-ce qu'il y aura des dérogations spéciales pour la délégation qui sera dans ces pays? Il y a toutes ces questions qui méritent des réponses. Mais nous sommes en train de penser, travailler étroitement avec les organisations de la société civile pour pouvoir travailler dans la main afin de faire face à cette pandémie. Je vous remercie.
If you can just round up now, Mr. Francis.
Yes. You say what?
If you can just round up that line of thoughts now so that we can take some questions.
Oh, ben, j'ai déjà conclu, madame.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been eye-opening, revelations that you have shared with us with regards to how ECOWAS is planning to engage this process. Maybe before I take some of the questions we have in the chat box, please don't hesitate to drop your questions into the chat box. I have a colleague that is, monitoring that platform. Mr. Francis, you talked about engaging the EMBs. And because I know this is a core part of the work that you do, providing training assistance to electoral personnel at the country level and regionally. I'm not sure if you mentioned engaging civil society and even providing support for them. I think that's one for me. And the other correction I wanted to make, I'm sure those listening in English may have heard the interpreters said, ECOWAS provided $500 assistance to all the countries holding elections. I would want to believe it's $500,000, not $500. That was the interpretation I got. So thanks, Francis and Funto. We have a number of questions on the floor, which I'm going to pick one after the other, and I would like you to note them down. And if we have more time, we're going to open the room for participants to engage with you directly, at least 2 or 3 participants to engage directly. There's a lot of questions, I think, from 4 people around the possibility of having remote voting, digital voting, as it were. And so the question the way I like to phrase the questions to you too is, if you see any of our West African countries going this way, considering the cost and the kind of technicalities, like, capacity that it requires to to hold such elections, remote voting elections. Related to that question is on diaspora voting. And I'm happy that both Wojo and Franklin are still on this call with other countries that are unable to make the panel, the panelists. What are we doing about that? There are a lot of our citizens who are locked out of their countries or even out of the continent for one reason or the other. Should this pandemic continue, which it's most likely, will we not be jeopardizing the mandates of certain class of people? Funto in a presentation talked about due to security situation in some countries, we have high number of IDPs, people who have been displaced, for example, in the northern part of Nigeria, of Mali, Burkina Faso, where we have pockets of terrorist activities going on. These are people that would not be able to participate in this election. So we are not only talking about the implications of the pandemic, but there are other threats that we have inherited even before the pandemic came, all issues around that. And another questions I have here talks about how can ECOWAS support civil society at the country level? And I'm sure they're talking about the election observer teams at the country level. In Ghana, we have CODEL. In Sierra Leone, we have NEW. And in Mali, I guess it's called SENI, and so on and so forth. What is the support now that we have restrictions on movement, there's less engagement, people cannot convene, as we used to do, and there's even no resources. It's difficult to get the kind of resources that we require, and Franklin mentioned that in his presentation. What is ECOWAS doing to support this electoral civil society mechanism at the country level in preparation ahead of these elections? To Funto, there's a question here that talked about, let me go over it again. We have quite a number of questions. I hope we can open the floor. Talked about in places like Togo and Uganda, restrictions of opposition voices was kind of a deliberate attempt by the incumbent. So I don't know if Funto, you have one or two example to share with us. And another point is around, so we have picked something around local monitoring, and how ECOWAS can support civil society to do that. Another questions we have, Francis, you had talked about carrying out some of this engagement online. I believe the meeting you had with the EMBs, if we're to be under normal circumstances, maybe it will have been physical. I don't know how ECOWAS does that. And somebody here is talking about the weakness of our internet, the low internet penetration that we have on the continent, and of course the weakness of our internet strength. We have experienced some of these challenges in holding this call. How can we base something as important as people's mandates on stable internet connectivity, for example? Why is ECOWAS considering that? Why not, consider something more, engaging and more balanced, as it were? Another question we have here is on ECOWAS and AU doing, okay, what is AU contribution to all of this? I guess maybe Francis may also be able to touch on that. Digitalization, okay, I think we've raised all this question. So Francis and Funto, I'm going to start with Funto. All these points I've read out, you can just take 1 or 2 minutes to respond to it, and then Francis can also come back with few comments, and then I believe many people will want to engage, and then I will take some of the hands. Please, if you want to say something, kindly raise your hands. I'm going to pick you. So Funto, you have the floor now. Your mic is muted, Funto.
Yeah, thank you. I've unmuted it now. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. But I'll just try to respond to a few of the questions, and I could come back if we still have time. There's remote voting, questions around digitization. These are all in the same stretch. First of all, I think there's a question of time, because the introduction of technology requires a lot of research, understanding the need, and then being able to test it in smaller elections. In West Africa, we have a lot of national elections. It is usually not advisable to introduce new technology just like that in a big election. I mean, a country like Uganda did it with the voter identification technology in 2016. Well, I mean, it succeeded, but I do not think it is good practice. That is a touch and go issue. However, that said, that does not mean there is no hope for it. And I think it's one of the opportunities that the pandemic introduces for us. It's time to start those discussions. Elections are cyclical. So even if we manage to do it in 2020, there are elections in 2021, there are elections in 2022. The same countries have elections now. In another 4 or 5 years, are going to have elections again. Why don't we open those discussions? The midway to it is to consider what you call special voting arrangements. And I think Francis alluded to it, extending the number of days for voting, for instance. Is that something to be considered, where you then can reduce the capacity at which you admit people to the voting stations? Could there be special voting arrangements where you have vulnerable people vote in advance of the general public? So there are a lot of midway measures that we can consider that don't require like full swap introduction of technology. That said, second question about cost of elections. Cost of elections. I'll use South Africa as an example. The chief electoral officer was asked such a question in a webinar last week, and I loved his answer. The state treasury is not about to give us more money. However, a sincere commission will be able to sit down and rethink its budget in a creative manner. For instance, there has been no travels in the last 3 months. Where is all the cost you have budgeted for travels? Where is that going into? Can it be reallocated into something else? If you have reduced the number of initiatives that require physical interaction, what savings are you making from that, and where are you putting it to? That is not to say elections were not largely underfunded before. So I am not going to deny that. I'm just saying commissions need to also think creatively. There was a question about the AU's contribution. I'm aware the AU is preparing a guideline for electoral commissions, and hopefully that will be out soon to provide some guidance on what the continental bodies' thoughts are for elections. Repression of the opposition, yes. There are good examples of it. And it raises the issue of legitimacy. If you run a process where parts of the political space was closed for the opposition or for some parties, it's then, apart from legitimacy, there's also the question of acceptance of electoral outcomes. And I think this is where the AU and regional economic bodies have a big role to play. If there is repression being observed right now, it's important to start highlighting it so that by the time elections are completed, there is a clear position on how has that trend of repression contributed to the final outcome of the elections, and levels of mediation that these regional bodies can undertake way ahead of election day rather than waiting for when the results are out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Funto. In addition to the questions that Francis has noted, let me put this question direct. Will ECOWAS deploy observers to all these elections? If yes, how? How would ECOWAS boycott the challenges that the pandemic has introduced? Believe you me, this pandemic has not only exposed the weakness of our health system, it has exposed the weaknesses within our total governance system. So, and we know the role of international observers in our elections and how they try to moderate in terms terms of, getting everyone to accept the outcome of elections or actually expose the weaknesses they may have observed during the process. So, Mr. Francis, in addition to the questions that you've noted earlier, will ECOWAS be deploying observers to these elections? How are we going to do that? Are we going to be virtual observers? What are the plans? Francis, you have the floor now.
Thank you for your question. And the question is straight, and I will respond straightly. ECOWAS will study case by case before deploying, because as you know, each country has specific disposition and before you enter the country. So some country can open the airport, some country can still maintain due to the situation. So we will study case by case before taking decision. As I'm talking to you now, ECOWAS is ready. All the administrative papers are ready for fact-finding mission, but we cannot move. For a long-term mission, all the administration papers are ready. For a short-term mission, everything is ready, but we are sitting here waiting for the situation to be improved. So that is the first response I can give you. So after that, when we are talking about diaspora vote and IDP, during the meeting with the Electoral Commission, in Burkina Faso, for example, they say for internal displaced people, they have two scenarios. The first scenario is, can we maintain those IDP in the constituency and register them as staying in the original constituency? The second scenario is, can we create a novel constituency and register them? So those are the questions, and those decisions must be after dialogue, must be inclusive. That is why ECOWAS is saying, to avoid violence or lack of legitimacy, at this time, they have to promote dialogue and discourse and agree on the way forward. We have a specific situation. If you want to report, if you want to change the legal law framework, we have to discuss. That is why ECOWAS and OSIWA initiate the study of legal framework of each country organizing election. What are the provisions before postponing election, for example? What are the provisions before modifying any process? Some country may reduce the delay of registration. What are the provisions in which condition? So we have done that study. We have to study that study. This document is here. Okay. We have to share with civil society for sensitization. Another aspect is the guide. We are initiating a guidance organizing election during a pandemic period. And this guidance will be done with a West African health organization. We will take experts on election operation and experts from West African health to sit down and give us guidance. That one we will visualize for the country to use. So how can ECOWAS support civil society? You know, ECOWAS is West African organization. ECOWAS is dealing with West African civil society, like what do we call it, WAXI or this WANEP. So it's difficult for us to go enter one country and say we are partnership with one local ONGO, when you know that NGO in the countries, sometimes political actors, they don't trust or they insinuate that they are this side or this side. So that's why ECOWAS is more careful working with West African regional civil society organization. So that is our strategy. And concretely now, we are thinking where we cannot deploy observer. That is a technical suggestion we want to give to our principal. Where we cannot deploy observer, we can collaborate with civil society, regional civil society, the umbrella or the contact, the annex there, to work together and have a view of what is happening in the country. That is what I can say at this level. I'm ready for any question.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for those feedbacks. Before I come back to all the speakers and also invite Ibrahima back, I'm not seeing any hands here. Is there one or two people that would like to make direct intervention? Shamri, do we have any hands there?
Everything is clear. You want question?
Okay, there is no hands at the moment. Shamri, just confirm for me if we have any hands. So there is a direct question to, okay, maybe not direct, but questions to Franklin or Wojo, and it's talking about the political context. I know you raised this during your presentation, so it's a very direct question to you. Do you think COVID has shrunk the space in which we normally organize elections, and do you think the election should still hold, irrespective of how shrink the space is? If you can just answer directly. Let me start with Franklin.
Oh, thank you very much. I think the election should hold. The processes for running, organizing the campaigns would definitely change, but the elections must hold.
All right, thank you. Wojo. Wojo, are you there?
Oui, je suis là. C'est bon? Vous m'entendez?
Oui. Oui, allez-y.
OK. Oui, pour la Côte d'Ivoire, effectivement, la Commission électorale indépendante, en coordination avec le gouvernement, a réaffirmé l'engagement à prendre en compte toutes les mesures barrières pour organiser les élections aux dates indiquées et un réaménagement en compte de la COVID. Les élections présidentielles auront
okay. All right, thank you so much. I'm not seeing any other question here, so I think Ibrahima, you can go ahead.
Moi, je voudrais poser une question. Lara, s'il te plaît, Lara.
Okay, d'accord.
Lara.
Yeah.
Moi, juste poser une question à mon ami et frère Francis. Francis, OK. Quand on...
Yeah, please go on.
Oh, oui, je fais une analyse tout à l'heure en disant, parlant de contentieux. Contentieux lié donc aux structures électorales. Contentieux lié à un éventuel troisième mandat d'un certain nombre de personnalités dans 3 à 4 pays. Est-ce que la CEDEAO voulait déjà prévoir dans sa stratégie d'éventualité de faire un plaidoyer, un lobby quant à ce qui concerne la contestation des résultats? La contestation des résultats. Je ne veux pas nommer les pays ici, mais ils connaissent les pays là où il y a des actions comme ça qui sont prévues. Est-ce qu'on ne pourrait pas prévoir, anticiper, au lieu d'attendre comme une situation au Mali où il y a 5 à 6 chefs d'État qui passent pour aller soutenir? Mais on aurait pu prévoir tout ça. Est-ce que la stratégie est mise en place par la CEDEAO, ou moins par les leaders de la sous-région? Merci.
Of course. Okay, thank you. I think that's very direct to Francis. So Francis, you can just respond in 1 minute.
Yes, it's a very good question, but you have to know when you are in diplomacy, you don't jump anyhow to say you come to mediate or you do. You have to wait, watch, and be accepted before coming. Everybody is ready to jump, but you cannot jump to any country if the people they don't invite you to come. They will tell you it's internal affair. What are you going to come to do? So you have to have agreement of everybody before you come in. That is the problem where our organizations are having. It's easy to say, we come late, we do this, we do this. There are some countries, ECOWAS kind of say they are ready to go, and they return them in the air, say you cannot land, go back. What can you do? You will force and go? No. So
thank you.
ECOWAS is trying to do what is best. It's not perfect, but we are trying our best. That is
okay.
It. Yes.
Thank you so much. Ibrahima, do you have some random points you have noted? You can go ahead with it now, then I can invite the speakers to make their 1 minute last comment, and then we can run it up. We have approximately 6 minutes. Ibrahima, you have the floor.
Yes, very quickly. I have noted some recommendations in the course of the discussion. So for civil society, I've noted that there is a need to advocate for special voting arrangements if there is a serious need for it, and that civil society groups should design strategies to combat issues of disinformation and misinformation. That they should also ensure that campaigns are issue-based, and that there is a need to strengthen the role of citizen observers, and also a need to refocus attention on establishing credible civil registries. There's also the need to develop effective voter education and information initiatives, which take into account the pandemic, and that would also ensure that vulnerable groups and other voters are not disenfranchised. And I've noted that ECOWAS should continue strengthening the ECOWAS platform with West African Electoral Commissions and ECONEC to discuss organizing of elections and ensure that the commissions take key measures to protect voters throughout the electoral cycle, facilitate dialogue, provide mediation where necessary, and rethink the design of election observer missions. So explore the possibility of working with local observer groups where there is a need for it. So I will pause there, and thank you really, Omolara, and all the
Thank you so much, Ibrahima. Thank you so much. So let me invite Franklin, then Wojo, then Funto, and then Francis to make their last comment. We have 1 minute each so that we can stay within time. So Franklin, what would you like to say?
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. And thanks to you and Ibrahima. I think the concluding remarks of Ibrahima are very instructive. I draw two lessons from the list of things he said. That voters or the citizens should be very open-eyed, to be vigilant. Organizations that are monitoring should be aided properly to do so. But in the case of Ghana, where now we do not really rely on foreigners to fund our elections, what it means is that citizens must be emboldened to take that active role and ensure that they are quite vigilant. The other point also has to be about the need for issue-based campaign. And I think that our colleagues in the CDD and some other organizations, WACSI and the rest, are doing so for the benefit of the country. We are also coming on board and ensuring that we give voices to alternate groups as well, because the two dominant parties have spent their forces already. And if we had my wish, I would wish that they are wiped away. But thank you. It's an interesting conversation. You have to unmute your mic. Lara.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Wojo, please, in minutes. 1 minute, please. Last comment. You say comment final.
Oui, juste d'abord remercier WACSI pour l'initiative et tous les partenaires qui ont pris la parole pour nous permettre de comprendre un peu la situation politique de la sous-région. Première chose qu'on pourrait dire, c'est que notre région est à la croisée des chemins, face donc à une pandémie, au moment où on doit garantir un certain nombre de droits. Le premier droit qu'on doit garantir, c'est le droit des citoyens à se faire enrôler et à respecter leur vote. À ce niveau, il faut renforcer la place de la société civile. J'ai apprécié ici l'appui que la CEDEAO apporte. Mais la CEDEAO gagnerait à accompagner la société civile financièrement. Que ça, on ne le dira jamais assez. Les 500 000 $ on apporte à l'État ou on apporte aux institutions en charge des élections dans les pays. On a aussi oublié un point important, donc la CEDEAO des citoyens. La CEDEAO des citoyens, c'est celle-là qui nous permet effectivement de comprendre la situation qui prévaut dans les pays. Dernière chose, c'est à l'endroit donc des organisations de la société civile. Mettre en place un plan de monitoring sur la violence électorale. Un plan de monitoring sur la violence électorale, interpeller les leaders politiques sur les propos, je dirais, dangereux, les propos tendancieux qui pourraient mettre à mal les processus électoraux dans les pays. Voici donc le petit résumé que je voulais faire. Encore félicitations à vous.
Merci, Wojo. Merci, Treben. So, Funto, your last words.
Thank you very much. Just to say that this has been an important platform, and I think the discussions, I hope if groups follow up on it, will take us some way forward. Finally, just to say that elections are about inclusivity. It's really about the people. So while EMBs, try as much as possible to keep within the time frame of tenures of incumbents, they should also engage with civil society. I would also say that civil society should put measures in place to facilitate dialogue to promote trust in the electoral process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Funto. Dr. Francis, may we have your last words, please?
Merci. Merci pour ce débat intéressant. Donc, ça a permis d'approfondir la réflexion sur le rôle de la société civile dans l'organisation des élections en cette période de pandémie. Je pense que la CEDEAO jouera toujours son rôle et essaiera d'appuyer la société civile, de collaborer surtout avec la société civile pour que les élections soient une réussite dans notre région. N'oubliez pas que nous qui travaillons à la CEDEAO aussi sommes des purs produits de la société civile. Nous savons quels sont les problèmes de la société civile dans ces temps de préparation d'élections. Donc, nous comprenons bien ce qui se passe et nous sommes très ouverts pour pouvoir collaborer. Et c'est la preuve, c'est que nous n'avons pas hésité à participer à ce débat. Malgré notre obligation de réserve, nous avons quand même accepté de contribuer. Donc, je remercie tout le monde, tous les participants et surtout les organisateurs pour nous avoir associés. Merci.
All right. Thank you so much to every one of you, to our speakers, Olufunto Akinduro, who is working with International IDEA, and Mr. Francis, who is the head of elections division at ECOWAS for some time now, Mr. Franklin Kujo, who is the founding president and chief executive officer of the Mani Center for Policy and Education in Ghana, and to Mr. Wojo Fini-Traore, who is the immediate past deputy chair of the National Commission of Human Rights in Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insight on this webinar, COVID-19 and Safeguarding Citizens' Mandate. And to my co-moderator, Ibrahima, my brother, my friend, who is the Guinean, the country officer for Osiwa Guinea, country officer for Osiwa Guinea. Thank you so much. So I think in rounding up, it is our collective responsibility to safeguard citizens' mandate ahead of all these elections. We talked a lot about citizens' engagement, building capacity, doing our bids on to educate our populace on the specialty around the elections this time, and making our campaign to be issue-based. This is a special time. and we cannot do business as usual where elections and other things are concerned. So we need to evolve into this new world. And to all partners listening to us, especially to ECOWAS, I believe after this conversation, we will be hearing more from you. We want to get updates from you on what is going on, how you are engaging, and how we can, collaborate with you as civil society, and how we can also mobilize ourselves for our collective good and deepening democracy in West Africa. On this note, on behalf of WACS's management and board, my executive director, Nana Afajinu, I believe Nana is there. I saw her. Nana, are you there? Oh, I think
yes, I'm here. I've been listening.
One word from you as we round up the meeting. I thought you were off.
Well, no, I just want to thank everybody who has made time for this. I know that there are 1,001 webinars going on, and yet you made time to participate in this and let your voices be heard through the chats, and you have engaged. We have a role as civil, make sure that the democracy that we have in our countries is secure. It is the role of the people, and elections, that is one of the ways we have chosen. So it's something that all of us have a role to play, and we are happy that ECOWAS is also looking at how we can work together and make sure that our elections do not only happen, but really carry the people's voice, and the people's votes count. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nana. So thank you, everyone. Until next month, where we'll be coming your way again with another interesting perspective of how COVID has affected the work that we do and our lives as civil society in West Africa. It's goodbye from us from WACSI. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Franklin. Thank you, Wojo, Francis, and Funto. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. Ibrahima, thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.